so I can already feel the comment section ripping me a new one. Cheers to that. So yeah, I think it's definitely pretty bold to state that the Sub25 is better than the Sub37, but before you go all ballistic on me on the comments, just hear me out a bit. I swear, it'll make sense. Hi, welcome to the Midlight Synthesist. Let's get started. So the Sub25 is perhaps one of the most controversial synths that Moog has ever come out with. At least to my knowledge, Moog synths generally are just received with joy and great enthusiasm by the whole synth community. But not this time. Lately they were really on a roll with their mother, grandmother, matriarch trinity. And recently they just took the world by storm by releasing their Subharmonicon, a great little synth which I might have something for you later on this month. So enter the Sub25, the smallest keyboard synth on Moog's current lineup. When this thing came out, some people actually thought this was a joke, a Photoshop parody of the Sub37. Kinda like those iPhones that pop up once in a while when they announce the new one's gonna have a bigger screen. But no, this thing was real. And it made a lot of people very angry and confused. What the hell was Moog thinking anyway when they came up with this? In this video, I'm gonna try to play the devil's advocate on what I think is perhaps one of the most misrepresented, misunderstood, and frankly, most underrated synths of the last few years. Of course, I'm gonna have to compare the Sub25 with the Sub37. Beyond the spec sheet, more of a practical point of view of an everyday user, and see if I can't change your mind about Moog's little underdog. So first off, let me briefly give you a little bit of context about my experience with other Moog synths, just so you know where I'm coming from with this. So my first Moog ever, and actually I think my first analog ever, was the Moog Minotaur. Now this is an absolutely monster bass synth. It's a little limited, but what it does extremely well. It was nothing like the other synths I had ever had, and finally I understood why Moog was so revered among the synth community. About a year after I bought it, the Sub37 was announced. And I knew right there and then, this was the synth for me. The Sub37 is perhaps one of the most inspiring synths I've ever touched. This thing was love at first sound. I remember perfectly, the first time I turned it on, I was just amazed by it, the bulk of it, the beauty of it. I swear I could make 1,000 videos on the beauty and the nuance of the paraphonic mode alone. Not only that, but this thing looked like the inside of a fighter plane cockpit. The blinking lights, the 40 knobs, the 74 switches, that black matte panel just tilted a bit, and those wooden end cheeks. This thing had it all. But there was a problem. Mostly me. I was really just a newbie synthesist at that time. I'm no expert right now, but I've learned a few things along the way, and I had no idea what the hell I was doing. And this thing was so much, it was overwhelming. Every time I tried to tweak a preset, just a few knobs turned here and there and everything just went to hell. But hey, no worries, I had 256 presets to rely on. And that's exactly what I did. I relied heavily on the presets, and I never really learned to properly use this machine or really synthesize a sound of my own. Of course, this was completely my own fault. Eventually, the opportunity arose to trade my Sub37 for a Dave Smith Rev 2 Prophet 8, which I regret to this day immensely. So regrets aside, fast forward a few years, lots of synths later, and I came back to the loving, warm analog arms of Moog with the Moog Grandmother. Now, the Moog Grandmother is really a special synth. It's like having this vintage synth that comes from the future. I know, it doesn't make any sense, but that's how I felt about it anyway. The Grandmother is extremely inviting, and it just makes everything so easy. And for me, that was just a school of synthesis right there. Now, of course, the Grandmother came to me at a time where I was more experienced with synthesizers, so obviously that helped. But no presets means no hand-holding, and that means you really need to connect and get to know that instrument that you're using. And in that aspect, the Grandmother is simple enough and complex enough for you to grow. So even though I was having a blast with the Grandmother, there was one thing that bothered me. Not having any presets at all meant that sometimes you would find this just amazing sound, and you might lose it. Making the perfect sound and then losing it is just kind of sad. And of course, you can always take a picture or make a drawing, but it's not the same. Enter the Sub25. Okay, I'll be completely honest. When I saw this thing, I actually thought this was an April Fool's thing from Moog. I mean, seriously, who the hell wants a diet Sub37? If anything, I wanted a Sub49 with 3 voices like the Matrix Brute or the Pro 3. And also, what was up with the price? This thing was almost $1,000, and we live in a world with Behringer synths now. So with all of that considered, this thing seemed to be a bit out of touch. Surely, no reasonable person would buy this.
Don't call me Shirley.
Don't worry, I am not a reasonable person, and I have no intention of becoming one. So here it is, the Sub25. And after a few weeks, I have to tell you, I was completely wrong. Amazing synth, terrible marketing. Okay, so first, let's set the record straight. This thing is not a mini Sub37. It certainly looks like one, but Moog themselves are cleared up that this is a successor to the Sub-Fatty, which is now discontinued. I think this is important to mention because the circuitry itself is based on another synth than the Sub37, and that gives it a slightly different character on its own. So really, we shouldn't be looking at this as a mini Sub37, but as a Sub-Fatty Rev 2. Actually, if you think about it, if they had marketed this as a Sub-Fatty 2 and maybe given it another color, maybe people would have been happier about it. As it stands though, the comparison to the Sub37 is inevitable. Not only by aesthetics, but the functions are actually pretty similar. But that just goes to show you how powerful this little thing is. So first off, the footprint. Having owned the Sub37, the footprint of the Sub25 is a welcome change. Where the Sub37 demands its own chunk of your studio, the Sub25 sits snugly on the desk beside another synth. Also, it's way easier to fit in a YouTube video than its bigger brother. Besides being easier to fit inside a studio, the Sub25 is definitely more gig friendly. Now, the Sub37 is not massive like a Matrix Brute by any means, but the tilted screen does mean that it has its own special case. And let me tell you, that thing is no picnic to be lugging around town. For live performers, especially in smaller venues, the Sub25 is definitely the way to go. Now, one of the main criticisms that the Sub25 has received is that in order to accommodate its fewer knobs, lots of the parameters had to be hidden in either secondary pages or accessed via cryptic button combinations to get to those deeper menus. However, even though I also had this initial reaction, Moog was actually pretty clever in which parameters they chose to keep hidden. All the while I've been using this, the parameters which are not immediately accessible are not parameters that I use that often. Things that I do use often, which are hidden parameters like the duophonic mode or the envelope delay, are combos that are easily remembered. And what's more, the preset that you save will save these settings. So basically you could have a template, for example, of duophonic mode, and each time you put that preset on, the duophonic mode is already enabled. Furthermore, the free Moog plugin editor and librarian is just extremely easy to use. It gives you all the access to the hidden parameters and a huge library of other presets. In actual use though, I found that the knobs available on the front panel are more than enough to give you sufficient control on sound shaping to be both fun and effective and give you hours of experimentation without any problems. I actually really like the simplicity of the panel layout, and it reminds me a lot of that easygoing nature of the grandmother. It's just inviting and warm, and you don't ever get lost. So onto the subject of limited presets. One of the first things that you're going to notice hopping on a Sub25 from a Sub37 is that you only get 16 presets. Compared to the 256 presets that you get on the Sub37, this might seem like a very big limitation, but I would actually argue that this is a hidden blessing. As I mentioned before, on the Sub37 I had so many presets that I ended up using them as a crutch. On the other hand, on something like the grandmother, you get no presets at all, so whatever sound you make, you will lose when you start tweaking again. On the Sub25, I found a unique balance between not having enough presets for you to get comfortable, but having the ability to save stuff when you're not hooked up to a computer, or if you don't have any way of just writing down what you made. However, if you are a preset junkie and just want to have millions of presets, you still do have the librarian, so if you hook this up to a computer, you're pretty much set. In my case, when on the Sub25, what I've ended up doing is just activating the panel and tweaking to my heart's content, and when I actually make a sound that I like, I have a preset where I can store it. So usually what I end up doing is about 16 presets every time I sit down with this. And that's a good thing, because eventually I'll give those presets to you. So what are you really losing when you go for a Sub25 instead of a Sub37? Is it a fair trade? To some, the biggest loss here might be the loss of the sequencer and the arpeggiator. Now, if you're looking at synths at around $1,000, then you probably own a lot more gear. If so, you probably have a sequencer lying around somewhere. Or even if you don't have that, you still have a DAW, so you could sequence this or arpeggiate this with Ableton. If that's the case, is the arpeggiator and the sequencer a deal breaker? At least not to me. To me, what I really miss about the Sub37 versus the Sub25, first is the aftertouch on that beautiful 37 key keyboard. You lose that beautiful 3-octave keyboard with aftertouch and go to a 2-octave keyboard with no aftertouch. From a performance standpoint, that actually does make a difference. And the second thing that you'll definitely miss is the second wave shape LFO. So to answer my initial question, is the Sub25 better than a Sub37? Of course not. The Sub37 is probably one of the best synths in the last decade.
You're goddamn right.
If you've ever used the Sub37, you know that the sky's the limit when you're modulating your sounds. On the Sub25, you get a much simpler interface, and you lose a few things. But then I remind myself that the Sub25 is about half the price of a Sub37. So you're actually getting about 90% of the functionality for almost 50% of the price. And that's a trade-off that I can live with. I don't know about you, but I'm really in love with this little synth, and it's not going anywhere anytime soon. So what do you think? Did I make my case, or is the Sub25 just a complete ripoff? Tell me in the comments below. I'd love to know what you think. I hope you find this video useful, or at least entertaining. I hope to see you in the next one. Have a great day.